welcome to the Hormone Café. I'm Dr. Sarah Pederson. I'm an OB-GYN and I specialize in holistic hormone balance and fertility. Today I want to walk you through what a normal cycle should look like. If everything's functioning well in our life, how should our period and our whole month look? And then we're going to talk about 5 red flags that something could be wrong with your period. So to begin, the beginning of your period, which we call cycle day 1, is your first day of flow, not spotting or irregular bleeding. So on your first day, you really want to have a good red flow. You don't want to have days of spotting leading up to your period. You also don't want to have days of cramping leading up to your period. So it's really important in a healthy cycle, your period will just start with a nice bright red flow. The color is really important. You want your period to look red, and it can be brown at the end, but you want it to have some red color. The other thing that's important is that you want your period to have a certain heaviness to the flow. If your period is too heavy or too light, that can be abnormal. We want our period to have 2 or 3 days of medium to heavy bleeding. So you want to start off with a heavy or medium bleed, heavy, and then after that, then it can taper off. And it's okay to have about 2 to 3 days of brown bleeding or a little bit of lighter bleeding or spotting at the end of our period. So if your period is really heavy, you're bleeding through more than 1 tampon or super pad an hour, especially for more than 1 day, you're bleeding through your clothes, you're rushing to the bathroom, that's definitely not normal. Or if your period is really light, of course, we all want to have light periods, but that's not normal, unfortunately. If you're one of those people who only have to wear 1 panty liner for an entire day on your period, that's not normal. That could be a sign that you have a low hormone profile, or you're not ovulating, or something else is abnormal about your cycle. So flow is really important. The other thing is color. Like we talked about, you want it to be red. And then the other thing is smell or discharge. You don't want to have an odor around the time of your period. So our period starts, we have that 3 days of heavy, beautiful red flow. It tapers off for a couple days. Then what's supposed to happen? Sometimes in what we call our follicular phase, between cycle day 1 and the time we ovulate, we can have a little bit of discharge, yellowish discharge in our underwear. And that's actually from the cells of our vaginal walls shedding. But we don't want to have any other discharge. We don't want it to be green. We don't want it to be itching. We want to have a period where we're feeling a little bit dry. And then we should be ovulating between cycle day 12 and cycle day 16. And we want that ovulation to be very regular. So if we're a person that ovulates on cycle day 16, we want to ovulate every month around cycle day 15, 16, 17, 16, so that it's regular and predictable. And around that time of ovulation, our cervical mucus should be clear and have a texture. We're shooting to have 3 days of high quality cervical mucus, meaning all of a sudden when we wipe on the toilet paper, we can see a clear goopiness that if we were to pick it up, we could stretch it. So red flags would be if it was watery, just complete water, that can be a sign of an infection. So you don't want your cervical mucus to be pure water. It can be slightly yellow tinged within the realm of normal, but you don't want it to be bright yellow or green. And even if it's a little bit yellow tinged, you definitely want it to be clear. Another thing that's a red flag is if you have bleeding in the middle of your period or in the middle of your cycle, you definitely don't want to have bleeding in the middle of your cycle. You only want to have bleeding when you're on your period. So even if you have a little bit of blood tinged mucus right around the time of ovulation, that's not normal. We definitely have to look into that. So we ovulate, we have our 3 days of high quality cervical mucus, and then after ovulation, our cervical mucus and our vaginal discharge should dry up. So if you're having an entirely dry cycle where you're not having any cervical mucus at all, or you have periods of time, which we call a continuous mucus cycle, where you have mucus almost the entire cycle. That's not normal either. So both of those things we want to get checked out. And then between the time that we ovulate and the time that we have our first day of flow again, so cycle day 1, we need that to be at least 10 and ideally 12 to 14 days, because that gives our body enough time to make hormones to support our uterine lining. So we really want to make sure we're ovulating between that cycle day 12 and 16, and then have a good 12 to 14 day luteal phase before we get our period, because a shorter luteal phase or a longer luteal phase, neither of those things is normal. And then in our luteal phase, we want to have dry vaginal discharge. Another really important thing about our luteal phase, we should not have PMS symptoms at all. Sometimes in our culture, we think, oh, I'm grumpy at my family, I'm just PMSing. But really, in our luteal phase, so in those days before we're going to get our period, we should feel amazing. We should feel our amazing, energetic selves. Because if we're feeling irritable, angry, grumpy, we're getting migraines, we're having headaches, we're feeling cramps, all of those things are a sign of hormone balance. So we should feel really, really great, are a sign of hormone imbalance. So in our luteal phase, we should feel really, really great, excellent, and then we should get our period. You don't want to have that sense of, oh man, I was so irritable or so full of rage or so grumpy or really, really low or depressed or really anxious, and then a couple of days passes and you get your period and you look back and you think, oh man, that's why I was so grumpy. It's because I was about to have my period. That is a sign of hormonal imbalance. So you really should have no mood changes between your ovulation and the time you get your period. The only thing that can be normal in your luteal phase is that sometimes we do have a little bit of increased insulin resistance in our luteal phase. So sometimes we'll crave a little bit more carbohydrates in our phase, and that is the natural design of our body to make sure that we get enough calories in to support and nutrients in to support the increased hormone production that's happening in that luteal phase. So of all the things that we think of as PMS symptoms, the only thing that's normal is to have a little bit more of an appetite or a little bit more carbohydrate cravings. And then at the end of our luteal phase, we should just get a nice bright red flow again. So in total, our overall period should be 24 to 35 days. So between cycle day 1 and another cycle day 1, you want it to be very, very regular within that 24 to 35 day range. And it shouldn't vary by more than 3 days. So if you're the kind of person that has a 30-day cycle, it can vary a little bit. We're not going to all perfectly have 30-day cycles every single month, but you don't want it to vary by more than 3 days. So for example, if I have 30-day cycles, I want to have 30 days, 31 days, 32, 31, 30 every single month. So if I was to look at a graph of my cycle every month, I want to have bright red bleed, dry, cervical mucus, dry, bleed. Every single month, over and over and over again. Our bodies are designed to be very regular like that. So let's talk about the 5 red flags based on what we just talked about normal looks like. So red flag number 1, you have irregular cycles. If your cycle is supposed to come and you're missing it, or you feel like it's coming late or early, that can be abnormal. You really want to have a regular clockwork cycle only varying by 3 days. So irregular cycles can be a sign of hormonal imbalance. The other red flag is flow. If your cycle is too light or too heavy, that's a red flag that something is going on. The third red flag is too much mucus or not enough mucus. If you have an entire cycle and you don't know any cervical mucus at all, that's not normal. Or if you have an entire cycle and you can't even tell when you're ovulating because you have mucus all the time, that's not normal either. The fourth red flag is pain. You really should only need ibuprofen a couple times a day on your heaviest days of your period, because sometimes we are going to have cramps, so it's okay to use a tiny bit of pain medication, but we really should be able to function on our period. Maybe you're going to feel a little bit less energy, or like you don't want to go work out that day because you're bleeding. But other than that, we really should feel like we can live our life. We can go to work. We can do all the social things that we want to do. Not that we have to cancel our entire day and we're going to be curled up in a ball around our period. That's a big red flag. The other red flag is any mid-cycle bleeding. So we should just bleed on our period, not bleed on our period. If you're having bleeding or spotting or any red in your cervical mucus, those are all signs that something is off or wrong. I had a patient who had really, really light cycles, and she only had to use a panty liner around every 2 to 4 weeks. And she went to her doctor, and her doctor told her, "Oh, you're so lucky. You have light cycles. It's okay." But actually, it's not really great to have such light cycles, because that can mean that your hormones are really low or that you're actually not ovulating. So in this patient, we figured out that she actually wasn't even ovulating, because sometimes what we think of as a period is actually more of a withdrawal bleed than it is an ovulatory bleed. Yes, you can have bleeding even if you're not ovulating, because sometimes your body will build up your uterus lining and then get exhausted from holding on to it and then shed it, even if we don't ovulate. So in this patient, we tested her hormones. I had her track her ovulation. We figured out that she wasn't ovulating at all, and she wasn't having a proper flow of her hormones throughout her cycle. So we really worked on all the things that she needed to do in order to support her natural hormone production. Sometimes that requires people to have bioidentical hormones to rejuvenate their uterus and their hormone flow in their bodies for a couple cycles. And so we got her eating in a way that was supporting her natural estrogen production. So then her body could finally make enough estrogen to have a nice, healthy ovulation, make a nice thick uterus lining, and her periods got much heavier. Even though that sometimes sounds like a bummer. Oh man, my period's heavier. This kind of is a bummer. But it's actually a sign to me that she was getting healthier and healthier. Her periods were getting heavier and heavier. And so we were doing a good job supporting her natural hormone production so that she would have enough uterus lining to have a good, healthy flow. So please pay attention to your flow. Make sure it is a flow and not just a little bit of spotting every once in a while, because a little bit of spotting every once in a while can be a problem. So that wraps it up. We walked through what a normal month looks like, how you should feel, and then we also walked through any red flags that would mean that you definitely want to get your hormones and your anatomy checked out. If you have any of these red flags, or if in the back of your mind you have the sense of, ooh, my hormones might not be balanced, please come make an appointment with me. I have a clinic called Vera Health and Fertility. It's here in Denver, Colorado. Our website is verafertility.com. Come see me and one of my partners. We can get your hormones checked. We can look for all kinds of things that could be causing abnormalities and get you on the right track to feeling amazing every single day and feeling like you have a handle on your hormones and like you know how to balance them. That is the goal. So please never give up on your body. If you feel like something is wrong, or in the back of your mind you're thinking, maybe I should get this checked out, please come see me. You can make an appointment online. And that wraps it up. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Hormone Café. And next episode, we'll be talking about the 6 pillars of hormone balance.